What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another top 5 video. We are really excited to bring you guys this list. I will just say before we move into it that it was really easy to make a case for each one of these receivers, and as you know, you read the title, it's the top 5 wide receiver late round flyers. In 2018, it seems that the receiver position itself is just super deep. There's a lot of guys in the middle rounds that you know you can really count on. If you get enough of them, you know that you're short up at the wide receiver position. But as we get later into the draft, there's a common trend. We have a lot of players that have performed at least decently well in their situations, but they have a lot of signs that point to no upside. They have a lot of signs that point to you can't expect more than what you got last season. And as you know, we want to shoot for maximum upside at the tail end of the draft. We're obviously not drafting these players to start, so that means they can sit, they can ride the bench, and we can wait and see how their situation develops. And the 5 receivers we have on this list have a prime opportunity to develop and become fantasy relevant producers. The best part, not one of these receivers is drafted within the top 60. So you're getting these guys at least wide receiver 60 or later. So for those of you in those deep leagues, those of you in best ball leagues, or just leagues that simply have larger benches, I can guarantee you that you guys are going to want some of these receivers on your roster 100%. Let's head into the stat of the day, but before I do, don't forget about the giveaway. If you haven't entered, make sure to enter. It takes probably about 30 seconds. All you have to do is follow both Nick and I on Twitter, be subscribed to the channel, and you will automatically be entered to win a signed 8x10 T.Y. Hilton photograph. And let me tell you, this thing looks amazing. You're definitely going to want to add it to your collection or to start your collection. So if you're interested in winning that, all you have to do, follow both Nick and I on Twitter, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. So let's get into the stat of the day. Unfortunately, there was no winner of yesterday's stat of the day, at least not up to this point when I'm recording. There's no point in me going over the question in this video once again because we have a new question for today. And today's question is, which receiver had a 33% drop rate on their catchable deep targets? Now there's a caveat, they must have had a minimum of at least 22 deep targets. So I'll mention it again. Which receiver had a 33% drop rate on their catchable deep targets, but does have a minimum of 22 total deep targets? Now this is a player that's going to be owned in 100% of leagues. I'll give you a hint, there is some high draft capital invested in this player. So if you think you know who it is, leave it in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins on Monday's video. So let's jump right into it. First player on this list, Cristian Kirk, wide receiver, 67 in ADP. I can tell you all right now that I will own many shares of Cristian Kirk. He costs almost absolutely nothing, and it baffles me completely why people aren't even considering Kirk as a viable late round pick. Now my general strategy is usually to go running back heavy at the tail end of the draft, which normally means I'm loading up on some of those middle round receivers, but any chance that I can pick a receiver in maybe the 13th, the 14th, the 15th round, I am always keeping an eye out for Cristian Kirk. Simply put, this kid's a stud. I mean, he's been doing it for a long time, and when I say that, I mean that he really broke out in college super early. He had a 93rd percentile college breakout age. And how did that happen? Well, he started his first game at Texas A&M. He posted 6 receptions for 106 yards and a touchdown, and followed that up with a punt return touchdown. So 2 total touchdowns in the game, over 100 yards, and he did that at just 18 years old in his very first time stepping on a college football field. Some of you may be asking, why is that important? And I understand why you would want to know that. But just think of it, we have a rookie, and oftentimes what we see on film in college doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL level. Cristian Kirk is not as polished as some of these other receivers in the draft class. That's a fact. But when you see a player who in his very first game, taking his game to the next level from high school to college, perform against guys maybe 2-3 years older and produce at that high of a level, you know a guy that is going to get an opportunity and he's going to make the most of it. The stage is not going to be too big for him, the lights aren't going to be too bright, and that's exactly what we're looking for when he's making this next jump in his career from college to the NFL level. Now fortunately for Cristian Kirk, he joins a really great situation, arguably one of the best situations that he could be joining out of any rookie receiver. The Cardinals, for quarterbacks, they currently have Sam Bradford and Josh Rosen. Both of those quarterbacks, they're kind of known in the short passing game, the high completion throws. I mean, Sam Bradford, as we know, led the league in completion percentage in 2016, converting nearly 72% of his passes on the entire season. That is a ridiculous pace. So who does that benefit? That benefits those players that run the short or intermediate routes. Well, what's the skill set of Cristian Kirk? If you had to classify him, he would be known as a slot receiver hybrid. He's 5'11", 201 pounds, and his most comparable player, get this, Stephon Diggs. Do you know who else most comparable player is Stephon Diggs? Antonio Brown. I'm not calling Cristian Kirk the next Antonio Brown, but what he does have is a nice thick frame and some really strong hands. He will get a knock by most other people for not really being a big speed guy, and that's true. But when you're playing from the slot, those things are not as important as they are if you're playing on the outside. And he still is an above average athlete. He runs a 4.47 40 and has a 64th percentile SPARQ score. But what should excite you the most about Kirk this year coming into the season is his ability to produce in yards after the catch. As we know, he returns punts. I mentioned it earlier in the video where I said he scored a touchdown in his first game. He also returns kickoffs too. And in his 3 years at Texas A&M, he actually returned 7 touchdowns on special teams. So if that tells you anything, just get the ball in this kid's hands and he's going to make a play out of it. So that should give you an idea of what he can produce as an individual contributor. But let's bounce back to his situation in 2018. Like I said, he has 2 quarterbacks who can be accurate. They may have a lower average depth of target, but it's going to benefit Kirk. You also have a team that has almost nobody in the depth chart. They are in desperate need of help this season. They lost both the Browns, Jerron and John Brown, and besides Fitzgerald, who is likely going to retire probably after this season when he reaches second on the all-time catch list, they have nobody. And don't forget, they invested a 2nd round pick into Cristian Kirk. They're going to want to get the ball in his hands, and it's likely that they will also use him for special teams. Patrick Peterson does currently return the punts, but it's no doubt that Cristian Kirk is going to get the opportunity to compete for that position. Now remember, he reached pay dirt on 7 occasions throughout 3 years in college. And for those Tyreek Hill owners in his rookie season, those were a lot of points that he was scoring on special teams touchdowns. They really did impact his fantasy value as a whole. So whenever you get a chance to score more fantasy points, I don't care if it's on special teams, get me the player who's going to be getting the ball. As for those of you that may be worried about Fitzgerald because he's the primary slot receiver, I wouldn't worry about it all that much. I think they can still have a really solid rotation that allows both players an opportunity to play in the slot. Larry Fitzgerald already was lining up on the outside on 38% of his plays, so Kirk will get an opportunity to be in the slot, which could make him one of the main reads in this offense right away. So it's easy to see how he could have one of the quickest ways to getting a high target market share out of all of these rookies. This team is lacking weapons. As an individual contributor, he really shows all the signs that we're looking for. And if you ask me, I think he could realistically be this year's Cooper Kupp. So before we move on, if you guys want more lists like this, or you want some sleepers, some targets, some busts, or simply are looking for in-depth breakdown or risk ratings, consider becoming a member of our website and gain access to our premium package and Facebook group. If you want more information on that, you can sign up today at thefantasyfootballadvice.com. The next player is Ryan Grant of the Indianapolis Colts, and he is currently going undrafted. Now, if you've been following us for a while now, you know that we are pretty high on the Indianapolis Colts this season. We expect Luck to come back and to also produce as long as he's on the field, which means there are going to be plenty of fantasy points to go around in Indianapolis, and all of their players are coming in at a significant value. Ryan Grant is no different. This is a team that has a really weak run game. It's a team that has a terrible defense, and those two factors together add up to a lot of garbage time points, especially for the receivers. Andrew Luck, we currently have slotted in as quarterback 7. ADP has him as quarterback 12, and the experts consensus rankings have him as QB 11. But no matter which way you spin it, Luck is projected to be a quarterback 1, and this is before we've even seen him throw a pass in preseason. If this offense is performing anywhere like we expect it to, there is going to be a lot of fantasy relevance, and the next guy in line, that's Ryan Grant. Remember, Andrew Luck's the guy who's going to eclipse 4,000 passing yards. He's also a guy who's going to throw for over 30 touchdowns. T.Y. Hilton, he's not a red zone weapon. He has a career average of 6 touchdowns. And any way you try to break up any of the numbers, there is more than enough room for Ryan Grant to eat. The only other competition he has at the receiver position, if you look at the depth chart, is a player by the name of Chester Rodgers. Chester Rodgers. If you're afraid of Chester Rodgers, then you are going to be drafting way too scared in your drafts. But I will admit that there is also Eric Ebron and Jack Doyle, who I think are much more bigger competition when it comes to his target market share. They should garner a little bit more looks when it comes to red zone opportunities, which does limit his overall upside. But it's not like you are investing high draft capital in him. Remember, he's going undrafted, and he's basically the wide receiver 2 in a really good offense. As for Ryan Grant himself, he's always been one of those quiet, consistent guys. So quiet that nobody even really talks about how well he was actually performing last season. I think most people would be surprised if we told you he was actually ranked 29th in wide receiver rating. Not only that, but he ranked 2nd in slot performance. So you have a top 30 receiver in wide receiver rating and a guy who can really kill it from the slot position. And when I said reliable, he's never fumbled in his career. He has a 78% contested catch rate and was ranked 7th in production premium. So you know if you target him, he's going to take care of the ball. And if you give him those 50-50 balls, he's more than likely going to come down with it. And for a quarterback who has a lot of new weapons, who hasn't been on the football field for a long time, finding someone who's reliable in the offense is going to be a very important factor. We get it. Ryan Grant, he's not a very sexy pick. He has absolutely no name value whatsoever, but that's part of the reason why he's going undrafted. The next wide receiver we have on this list is Anthony Miller, currently coming in as wide receiver 60. And to start off, we do have a lot of faith in this Bears offense. It could be one of the most improved offenses we see the entire year. They have a top 5 passing schedule, and Jordan Howard's ability in the rushing game, it's going to be keeping these defenses honest. As for Miller, he is coming into a situation where he has more competition for targets, more so than some of these other rookies. But when you really break it down player for player, Miller could finish the season 2nd on the team in targets. They have Allen Robinson. Obviously, Robinson should lead the team in targets, but at the same time, he's also going to demand the best cover corner on the opposing defense. Then you have Trey Burton, who is going to be his real competition when it comes to being 2nd in total team targets. And while we do like the upside of Burton, especially considering the young quarterbacks do tend to lean on the tight end, we still think Anthony Miller will have an opportunity to prove himself. Other than that though, there is nobody on the roster that really does concern us. You have Kevin White, who can't stay healthy, so don't be worried about him. And then you also have the new guy they brought in, Taylor Gabriel. Gabriel's only 5'8", 165 pounds. He's a gadget player at best. Think about it. 5'8", 165, that's smaller than Cole Beasley. There is no world where Taylor Gabriel is going to garner a large workload. His body simply won't be able to keep up with any type of consistent production. Now, like Kirk, Miller was a 2nd round draft pick. He also comes in at a similar size, 5'11", 201 pounds. And while they're the same size, the skill sets of each player is super different. For one, Miller is one of the best route runners in the draft class alone. He has quick acceleration. He also had back-to-back 1,400-yard seasons and scored a combined 32 touchdowns in the past 2 years in college. 32 touchdowns. That's an average of 16 per year. And if you want to talk athleticism, 85th percentile burst score, 83rd percentile agility score, and 89th percentile spark score. Kirk's an above average athlete. Miller is a well-polished, exceptional level athlete. This is why we do have faith that Miller is going to be able to come in and really prove himself and make a name for himself. His athleticism is one of the reasons why we think he will have a strong ability to come in and make an immediate impact. Oftentimes with rookie wide receivers, we don't expect them to make a ton of impact in the first year, at least not on the NFL level, because maybe they're not prepared. They don't have the work ethic that's needed to succeed. If there's a player you want to put your chips on Anthony Miller, because this guy was a college walk-on. He made his way from college walk-on to 2nd round pick, so he knows what it's like to be hungry and he knows what it's like to compete to prove himself. And that may not mean much to a lot of people, but remember, not everything can be gauged with stats. Sometimes those outside factors like adversity and work ethic really do find their way to the football field. And if you ask us, Anthony Miller seems to be the complete package. He's currently being drafted as wide receiver 63. And unlike the other players on this list and in this range, I think he's going to be owned in about 90% of leagues, and I could really see some people reaching on him. So if you are late in the draft and you really want Anthony Miller on your roster, don't be afraid to draft him around earlier if you have to. Tyrell Williams is the next player on this list. He comes in at wide receiver 64. Now at this point, I'm pretty sure we are all familiar with who Tyrell Williams is, but just in case, I'll give you the highlights for all of you who may not know, just as a quick refresher. So Williams is basically a player profiler dream. He's right up there with the Martavis Bryants, the Dante Moncriefs, the Jeff Janices. There is really no specific category where he is weak athletically. His weakest area is his 40-yard dash time, where he comes in at a 4.48. Yes, I said that. 4.48 is his weakest category. That's a faster 40 than AJ Green, Keenan Allen, Antonio Brown, and basically any other top 12 receiver besides Odell and Julio. He's also an 80th plus percentile athlete in every other category, including a 98th percentile catch radius. So basically, he's a freak of nature. We saw him burst onto the scene in 2016 when Keenan Allen went down with an injury, and throughout the season, Tyrell was basically a consistent performer, one of the real waiver wire gems. He ended up finishing as wide receiver 18 and even cracked that elusive 1,000 yard mark and reached the end zone 7 times. Obviously, the injury had a ton to do with it. He came crashing down to earth this year, but he still did manage a respectable 700 yards and 4 touchdowns. Even though those totals were on the low end, Williams really did make the most of every opportunity he had. He was the 15th highest rated receiver last season per Pro Football Focus, and there is some room for him to improve because he had 6 drops on just 49 catchable targets. Obviously, that could be looked at as a risk factor, but it could also be considered upside if he were to clean up his drop rate. I wouldn't expect it because he had a similar amount of drops the season before, but if this is an area he can improve in, we could see his production take a significant bump up. So Travis Benjamin is known as the team's deep threat, and in reality, Benjamin is that, but Tyrell Williams also does get a lot of deep targets. He was actually targeted on 29.4% of his passes, which was good for 12th in the league, and we wouldn't really expect that to change. He's not going to need a ton of volume to produce. But if you're basing your draft pick on his production from last season, obviously you would be disappointed with what he was able to produce if that was what he was going to do this year. But remember, there's no Antonio Gates and no Hunter Henry. Those were the 2 main guys that they utilized in the red zone, and Rivers has been using the tight end position in the red zone for many years. This season, they're going to have to look to get more receivers involved, and they can't give all the targets to Keenan Allen. Obviously, they still have Mike Williams, but he hasn't been able to stay on the field, and he also hasn't shown us anything to really be worried about. When he has been on the field, he played in 10 games and really couldn't be any quieter than he was. And Tyrell Williams is at least somebody that Philip Rivers has a rapport with. He already had a 1,000 yard season with Philip Rivers, and like I said, he has a 98th percentile catch radius. He could be a legitimate red zone weapon this year if that's what the game plan dictates. All that adds up to is that Tyrell Williams doesn't need an injury in order to be fantasy relevant this season. But if Keenan Allen does get injured, you have a complete monster on your hand, and he could break that 1,000 yard mark once again and be a top 20 receiver immediately. The final player on this list is Tyler Lockett, coming in at wide receiver 60. It wasn't intentional, but it appears we saved the best for last because Tyler Lockett is a player that we are trying to target in every league. In previous seasons, everybody knows that Lockett has a ton of upside. I mean, he's never really been a fantasy relevant player, but every year he gets drafted, and at this stage, he's actually being drafted the lowest in his entire career, which doesn't make sense because he's actually coming into one of the better situations he's ever been in since he's been in the NFL. So something just doesn't add up. So as for Lockett himself, he runs a 4.440, which is in the 93rd percentile, and he's going to primarily play as the deep receiver on the Seattle Seahawks team. As we know, Paul Richardson played in that deep role last season, and it proved to be a really fruitful position. Some of you may not know this, but Tyler Lockett only played on 64% of the snaps throughout the entire season for 2017. What's really impressive while only playing 64% of the snaps is that he received a whopping 69 targets. Remember, Lockett's a 4.4 guy. He's a deep threat, and to receive 69 targets, that is really good. For reference, Marvin Jones finished as wide receiver 9 on just 108 targets. Robbie Anderson, another deep threat receiver, he finished the season as wide receiver 18 on just 114 targets. What does that tell you? It basically tells you you do not need to get 150 targets to be in the top 20 at the receiver position as long as you're a deep threat, and that's exactly what Tyler Lockett is. So that 64% snap percentage, that was actually not a direct result of him not being good or an indicator that Paul Richardson was a better athlete than him. He had experienced one of the most brutal leg injuries that I can remember in recent time. It happened in 2016, and for those of you who do not remember exactly how bad that injury was, I challenge you, look it up on YouTube after you're done listening to this video, and or don't, because it's actually super gross. But you can't expect someone to just come back from that at 100% on such a short time frame. I know I said it happened in 2016, but it literally happened the day before Christmas. So we're talking December 24th. That means for basically the entire season, he wasn't even a year removed from that injury. And for a player who relies a lot more on his athleticism, that can be a real limiting factor. Pete Carroll this offseason so far, he already came out and said that throughout 2017, they were unable to really get him as involved as they'd like, just due to him not being able to physically do the things that he was able to do in previous seasons. Now, as of June 7th, they did come out and say he is 100% healthy, no limitations, and he is ready to be a steady producer for this team. So last year, with all those limiting factors, 69 targets on just 64% of snaps. Not only that, they lost Jimmy Graham and Paul Richardson and Luke Wilson. Between the three of those players, that adds up to 200 targets that are up for grabs on this team. And as much as we expect Baldwin to see an uptick in targets, it's undeniable that Lockett will not only receive an increased snap share, but he's also going to see an increased target share. If a deep threat player like JJ Nelson can play on 93% of snaps, Tyler Lockett on a team that is really shallow at the wide receiver position can definitely see an increase of over 20% more than what he did at last season. Now, 69 targets, an uptick of 20%, would already bump him up to 82 targets. Now, then factoring in that the team's only weapon besides Lockett is Baldwin and Brandon Marshall, it is a completely reasonable projection to believe that he is going to be up at around or over 100 targets on this season. And as we know, Russell Wilson is not afraid to air it out. He's been the top 3 in the amount of deep targets that he has every year, and that's going to benefit a player like Lockett. Also, this team is going to be in a ton of shootouts. They have a terrible defense. Yes, they're going to try to run the ball, but they have a really bad offensive line. It's very possible that the run game just simply is not very efficient. And if this defense does come out to be as bad as it's projected, they may not even be in a position to be able to run the ball in a lot of matchups in 2018, at least later in the games, the third, the fourth quarter, which could be the time of the games where Tyler Lockett gets most of his production. So like I said, he comes in at wide receiver 60, which is crazy to think of because there are loads of receivers that are going rounds higher that have a ton of less upside. We're going to be targeting him in every league, and his ADP over the past 30 days has surprisingly been falling. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did enjoy this video, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.